Ladies and gentlemen, there are moments in history when the walls built on pride and persuasion begin to crack, not because of sudden catastrophe, but because the truth has been quietly gathering strength behind them. What once seemed untouchable starts to falter under the weight of its own contradictions. Accountability is the quiet force that underpins every just society. It is not always visible, not always immediate, and certainly not always loud. Yet it persists, a constant presence waiting for its moment to assert itself. When people in power begin to believe that they are immune to scrutiny, that belief becomes the seed of their own undoing. History does not forget, it waits. The process of accountability may move slowly, but it moves with certainty. Every action taken in arrogance or deception leaves a trace, and every trace eventually leads back to its origin. The illusion of invincibility is one of the oldest temptations of leadership. Those who taste power often start to believe that their position, influence, or following can shield them from consequence. For a time, it may even seem true. The louder the voice, the more crowded the stage, the easier it becomes to think that applause equals absolution. Yet accountability does not fade in the noise of popularity. It lingers, observing from the shadows, collecting the fragments of truth that others may ignore. When the right moment arrives, those fragments assemble into a story too clear to deny. Accountability is not vengeance, it is balance. It exists to remind humanity that integrity cannot be traded for convenience. In every society, in every era, people rise with charisma and confidence, only to fall because they mistook attention for immunity. They forget that the same public that elevates can also expose. They underestimate the endurance of truth, how it can survive ridicule, distortion, and delay. But truth has time on its side. It does not panic when challenged or buried. It waits until the weight of deceit collapses under its own contradictions. There is a rhythm to the way accountability works. It begins quietly, often with whispers or doubts dismissed as noise. Then come the small revelations, overlooked details, inconsistencies, and the courage of those who choose to speak when silence would be safer. Gradually, what was once uncertain becomes undeniable. Each step forward adds pressure to a structure already weakened by its own flaws. Those who once seemed untouchable start to show cracks not because their power has diminished, but because their actions have caught up with them. Accountability is not just about punishment, it is about the restoration of trust. When someone who wielded influence without integrity faces scrutiny, it reminds society that the system still breathes. It restores faith in the principle that no voice, however commanding, can rewrite reality indefinitely. People may be misled for a time, institutions may hesitate, and justice may appear delayed, but these are only pauses, not endings. The truth has an unbroken patience that those who fear exposure cannot match. There is also a deeply human element to accountability. It tests not only the subject of scrutiny, but the character of those who watch. Will society choose comfort or conscience? Will the witnesses look away or demand clarity? Accountability thrives where people refuse to be numb, where they insist that values must mean something even when it is inconvenient to uphold them. In that sense, every citizen becomes part of the process. Justice does not emerge from institutions alone. It grows from collective insistence that integrity must not be optional. Power built without accountability is like a structure raised on shifting sand, impressive for a moment, but destined to collapse when the ground gives way. Every unchecked decision, every manipulation of truth, adds weight to the instability beneath. The higher the rise, the harder the fall, and the louder the reminder that principles ignored in the climb will return in the descent. Accountability, patient and persistent, ensures that no matter how long it takes, the reckoning will come not through anger or revenge, but through the simple, inevitable return of balance. The true strength of any nation lies not in the charisma of its leaders or the passion of its supporters, but in the quiet, unyielding power of its laws. Influence can shape the moment, but law shapes the future. Influence is emotional, persuasive, and temporary. The law is deliberate, structured, and enduring. It is the anchor that holds society steady when waves of ambition or deception try to pull it away from its moral course. Influence may move crowds, but only the law can move history forward with fairness and clarity. The law is the collective promise of a people to themselves, a commitment that justice will not bend to the will of the powerful or the charm of the persuasive. It was created not to serve personalities, but to protect principles. When someone rises to power and begins to believe that their influence places them above accountability, that is when the law reveals its true strength. The law may not shout, but it never forgets. It watches with patience, allowing influence to rise and fall until the moment comes when it must assert its quiet, uncompromising authority. Influence thrives on perception. It depends on admiration, fear, or loyalty. But these are fragile foundations. They shift with public mood, with new revelations, with time itself. Law, on the other hand, stands independent of emotion. It does not care who commands the stage or who fills the headlines. It speaks the same language to everyone, a language written not in favor or fame, but in fairness. This is why societies that forget the supremacy of law over influence eventually fall into chaos, and why those that remember it endure. There are moments when influence appears to win. There are times when the powerful seem immune, when institutions hesitate, and when those seeking justice feel silenced by spectacle. But these moments are illusions, because influence, no matter how vast, cannot permanently outpace legality. The law may take its time, but its progress is steady, its reach inescapable. It does not chase the noise. It follows the evidence. And when it arrives, it does so not with drama, but with precision. The conflict between influence and law is as old as civilization itself. Kings once believed their crowns exempted them from consequence. Leaders believed their followers could shield them from judgment, and the wealthy believed their fortune could buy them freedom from the truth. Yet, over and over again, history proved otherwise. When influence collides with law, influence always yields. Because law is not a person, it cannot be intimidated, flattered, or persuaded. It exists as a living reflection of collective conscience, the final safeguard when morality is tested. The danger arises when influence tries to disguise itself as law, when rhetoric replaces reason, when personal loyalty overrides evidence, and when spectacle clouds the facts. Societies begin to lose sight of the boundary between justice and power. But even in those moments, the law endures beneath the surface, gathering strength through the integrity of those who still believe in its purpose. Judges, investigators, and citizens who refuse to be swayed by performance become the guardians of that endurance. They remind the world that truth may stumble, but it never falls permanently. The power of law is not in its swiftness, but in its certainty. It does not seek approval, nor does it require applause. It moves at its own pace, guided not by popularity, but by principle. Those who depend on influence often mistake delay for defeat, assuming that silence means surrender. Yet the law's silence is not weakness. It is preparation. It builds its case piece by piece until its foundation is unshakable. When it finally acts, it does so with a weight that influence cannot match, for its authority is not borrowed from admiration, but granted by the people themselves. In the end, influence fades with the news cycle, with changing moods, with time's inevitable erosion. The law, however, remains. It waits beyond the noise, beyond the performance, beyond the illusion of control. It is the one power that cannot be bought, silenced, or spun, the invisible thread that keeps justice alive, even when the powerful forget that they, too, are bound by its reach. Public opinion is a living force, unpredictable, emotional, and yet profoundly responsive to truth when truth is revealed with clarity. It can be swayed by charm, clouded by loyalty, or manipulated by misinformation, but it cannot remain blind forever. For a time, persuasion can mask reality, and narratives can drown out facts. Yet when evidence emerges, when details become impossible to ignore, the tide begins to turn. People who once defended without question start to hesitate. Doubt enters where certainty once lived, and in that hesitation, the power of evidence begins its quiet work. The human mind seeks coherence. It wants to believe in stories that make sense. When those stories begin to fracture under the weight of facts, the emotional foundation that once supported them starts to crumble. Public opinion does not change in an instant. It shifts gradually, like a glacier breaking apart piece by piece. First come the whispers of contradiction, then the small admissions that something might be wrong, and eventually the realization that belief built on loyalty alone cannot stand against verified truth. Influence and charisma can delay that process, but they cannot stop it. A figure once admired may continue to speak, to persuade, to insist, yet each new revelation weakens the trust that once surrounded them. The audience that once cheered begins to question motives, and those who once repeated talking points start to search for facts. The relationship between the public and the powerful is sustained only as long as truth and trust coexist. When evidence exposes a betrayal of that trust, the bond breaks. What follows is not just disappointment, it is awakening. Evidence holds a special kind of authority. It is indifferent to popularity, immune to emotion, and immune to denial. It speaks in documents, testimonies, and timelines that cannot be dismissed with rhetoric. When people see proof laid bare before them, not rumors, but tangible, verifiable truth, the illusion of certainty dissolves. The power of public opinion, once manipulated by words, becomes redirected by reality. The same energy that once defended begins to demand answers. The same voices that once echoed approval start calling for accountability. The shift is never comfortable. For many, it feels like betrayal to realize that someone they trusted, supported, or even admired may have misled them. The instinct to resist evidence is natural, for it threatens identity and pride. Yet over time, reason prevails. A society cannot live forever in denial without paying the price of disillusionment. Gradually, people begin to prioritize integrity over emotion, facts over faith, clarity over comfort. They may not say it out loud at first, but in their hearts, the realization grows that truth, however painful, is the only foundation strong enough to rebuild trust. Public opinion, once awakened by evidence, becomes a force of correction. It demands accountability from those who misused influence and transparency from those who hold power. What began as quiet doubt becomes open discussion. What started as private discomfort becomes public demand. And once that momentum builds, it cannot easily be reversed. The narrative no longer belongs to those who crafted it. It belongs to the people who now see beyond it. The most profound transformations in society have always begun this way, not through sudden revelation, but through the slow, steady erosion of illusion. Evidence does not shout, it accumulates. It builds until denial becomes unsustainable. In every age, in every nation, when truth finally breaks through the surface, it reshapes perception permanently. The crowd that once defended passionately becomes the same crowd that questions, challenges, and holds accountable. What was once dismissed as speculation becomes accepted as fact, and the collective conscience begins to realign. Public opinion is not perfect, but it is powerful when informed. It forgives mistakes, but it does not forgive deception. Once evidence has shifted the perspective of the people, no amount of rhetoric can return them to ignorance. They may be slow to change, but when they do, the shift is irreversible, and the moral weight of that transformation carries consequences far beyond the individual who inspired it. Defiance, in its purest form, is not inherently wrong. It has shaped revolutions, challenged injustice, and advanced progress throughout history. Yet, when defiance is used not to uphold principle, but to protect ego, it becomes a destructive force, a rebellion not against oppression, but against truth itself. There is a difference between standing firm for values and standing stubbornly against accountability. One builds legacies, the other builds ruins. When defiance crosses that invisible line, it begins to consume the very power it seeks to preserve. At first, defiance can appear strong. It can command loyalty, inspire admiration, and even intimidate opposition. To many, it looks like courage, the refusal to yield in the face of criticism. But beneath that surface lies a subtle decay. When someone refuses to acknowledge fault, when they treat the truth as negotiable and accountability as an insult, their defiance becomes a trap of their own making. Each act of resistance creates a deeper entanglement, as every denial requires another, and every justification demands a new distortion. What begins as strategy becomes habit, and habit becomes identity. The consequences of such defiance are rarely immediate. The world often tolerates arrogance longer than it should. People excuse misconduct when it is wrapped in charisma or framed as conviction. But the truth is patient, and patience has a way of transforming silence into exposure. As facts accumulate and contradictions multiply, defiance begins to look less like strength and more like fear. The person who once seemed unshakable starts to tremble beneath the pressure of their own pretenses. Defiance against principle has a corrosive effect not only on the individual, but on everyone who enables it. Supporters become complicit in denial, institutions become hesitant to act, and the public grows numb to deception. Over time, defiance isolates its source. The circle of loyalty grows smaller, the applause quieter, the defenses weaker. Those who once rallied in solidarity begin to retreat, realizing that what they defended was not conviction, but obstinacy. The defiant, left surrounded by the echo of their own defiance, mistake isolation for integrity, and that delusion accelerates their downfall. There is also a psychological cost to persistent defiance. Living in contradiction requires constant performance, a daily act of maintaining a narrative that reality refuses to support. It is exhausting, corrosive, and ultimately unsustainable. The energy spent on denial could have been used for redemption, but pride seldom allows that choice. The defiant convince themselves that backing down is defeat, when in truth, humility would have been their only protection. The longer they resist, the heavier the burden becomes, until the weight of unacknowledged truth breaks the structure entirely. Defiance breeds conflict not just with opponents, but with the very systems that uphold order. When rules are mocked, when norms are dismissed, when institutions are undermined in the name of personal immunity, the defiant do not weaken their accusers, they weaken themselves. Every challenge to legitimacy invites scrutiny, and every attack on structure strengthens the resolve of those who still believe in it. What begins as rebellion against authority ends as rebellion against consequence, and that battle cannot be won. The law, the truth, and time itself form an alliance that no defiant will ever outlast. There comes a moment when defiance stops commanding admiration and starts provoking pity. The audience that once marveled at audacity begins to see desperation. The repetition of denial, the aggression toward accountability, the constant search for blame elsewhere, all of it exposes the insecurity beneath the posture. The louder the defiant protest, the clearer their fear becomes. They fight not to protect ideals, but to avoid the mirror that reality holds before them. And in that struggle, they lose the one thing defiance was meant to preserve: control. The consequences of defiance are therefore both external and internal. Externally, the walls of support crumble. Internally, the certainty that once drove resistance collapses into confusion. Each lie told to sustain defiance must eventually face the truth that cannot be silenced. Every act of rebellion against accountability builds a higher wall between the individual and redemption. Defiance promises strength but delivers isolation. It promises power but yields exposure. It begins with the illusion of control and ends with the revelation of vulnerability. History does not forget. It may wait, it may observe, it may appear silent, but it records everything with unflinching accuracy. Every word spoken in arrogance, every decision made in deceit, every moment of injustice disguised as strength, all are written into the fabric of time, waiting for their context to reveal their true meaning. Power fades, influence dissolves, and reputations shift with public sentiment, but history remains untouched by persuasion. It keeps its own score, one that no individual can rewrite. Those who believe they can outrun history mistake delay for erasure. They confuse the present's distraction for permanent immunity. For a time, it can seem as though their version of events will stand unchallenged. Control over narrative can distort perception temporarily, but history is not written in headlines or slogans. It is written in hindsight. The record does not close when the crowd disperses or when the applause fades. It continues to evolve as new facts emerge, as secrets surface, and as courage compels truth to speak when silence once prevailed. The memory of history is long because it is impartial. It does not care who held the podium or who commanded the moment. It examines actions, not intentions, outcomes, not excuses. The powerful may try to frame their legacy, but history always reclaims it. When the noise of self-defense fades, when time strips away propaganda and personality, only conduct remains. The same gestures once hailed as boldness may be reinterpreted as recklessness. The same strategies once praised as genius may be revealed as deception. Time is the great editor that revises reputation according to truth. Every era believes it is exceptional, that its controversies will be forgotten as the world moves on. Yet history has a way of reopening old wounds when the lessons have not been learned. It revisits arrogance, corruption, and deceit not out of malice, but out of necessity, to remind future generations that unchecked power always ends in collapse. The mistakes of one age become the warnings of the next, and those who ignore these warnings find themselves mirrored in the failures of those who came before them. History also measures silence. It remembers not only the acts of those who abused authority, but also the silence of those who allowed it. It records the moments when justice could have been defended, but was postponed for convenience. It marks the difference between complicity and courage. Time eventually reveals who stood for principle and who hid behind pretense. The pages of history are not just filled with names of those who rose and fell, but with the quiet truth of who dared to tell the story honestly. The permanence of history is both a warning and a form of justice. The individual who mocks accountability today will one day be studied, not celebrated. Their choices will not be viewed through the lens of charisma, but through the clarity of consequence. Generations that follow will read their story not as myth, but as evidence of what happens when pride overshadows integrity, and when the pursuit of power outweighs respect for truth. In this way, history becomes a tribunal that never closes, a witness that never forgets, a record that no influence can erase. Those who fear scrutiny in the present often underestimate the patience of the past. Time is not bound by the same urgency as politics or performance. It observes quietly, gathering testimony through documents, actions, and memory. The truth it carries forward is immune to denial because it is continually re-examined by those who seek understanding rather than justification. Every generation reinterprets the past, peeling away the illusions of the moment until only the substance of reality remains. History's memory stretches beyond lifetimes. It does not rush to judgment, but it does not grant forgiveness without reflection. It allows the powerful to speak loudly in their own defense, then allows the centuries to answer them. The monuments they build, the narratives they shape, the myths they craft, all are subject to time's correction. The memory of history is long because it belongs not to individuals, but to humanity. It remembers, records, and reveals what those bound to the moment refuse to see. Truth has a rhythm that cannot be silenced. It moves like a tide, slow at first, almost invisible, gathering strength beneath the surface until it becomes an undeniable force. It does not ask for permission, nor does it seek approval. It simply moves forward, eroding the walls of deceit and washing away the illusion of control. The tide of truth does not retreat forever. Even when it seems distant, it is only gathering power to return stronger than before. In every age, there are those who believe they can resist the truth, that through influence, manipulation, or sheer defiance, they can outlast it. For a time, they may appear to succeed. Their words shape perception, their image commands loyalty, and their narratives flood the public space like waves of distraction. But truth is not deterred by spectacle. It does not compete for attention. It simply waits. Its strength lies in its permanence, the quiet certainty that facts do not dissolve under denial. When the noise fades, the tide begins its return, steady and unstoppable. The relentless nature of truth is what gives justice its endurance. Lies may win the moment, but truth always wins the aftermath. It gathers fragments, a misplaced document, a forgotten witness, a contradiction overlooked in arrogance, and transforms them into evidence. One revelation leads to another, each discovery unraveling the thread of falsehood a little more. The process may be slow, frustrating, and even painful to watch, but it is precise. Truth does not rush, because it knows it does not need to. It understands that time is its ally, and patience its most powerful instrument. There is a point in every deception when the tide turns. It may begin quietly, a question asked by someone unafraid, a detail that no longer aligns, a story that collapses under its own contradictions. Each ripple adds to the swell. Soon, what was once dismissed as rumor becomes recognized as reality. The narrative built on denial begins to fracture, and those who once clung to illusion find themselves stranded by the receding tide. The truth does not shout when it arrives. It simply exposes, and in its exposure, it restores balance. Those who underestimate truth often confuse delay with defeat. They interpret silence as safety, believing that if the tide has not yet reached them, it never will. But truth is not a storm that passes. It is a current that returns again and again until every false foundation is swept away. The longer one resists, the greater the force of its return. Each attempt to suppress it adds weight to its eventual resurgence. And when it finally breaks through, it does not ask what was intended. It reveals what was done. Truth has a way of humbling those who try to command it. The powerful may summon advisors, lawyers, or followers to defend them, but truth cannot be negotiated. It cannot be intimidated by status or silenced by authority. It exists independently of human will, beyond the reach of propaganda. It belongs to no one, and yet it governs everyone. To stand against it is to stand against the inevitable. To deny it is to deny the very structure of reality itself, and reality always wins. The relentless tide of truth also tests the integrity of those who witness it. Many will see its coming and turn away, afraid of what it might reveal. Others will try to hold it back, fearing that its arrival will destroy what they once believed. But there are always a few who stand firm, who choose honesty over comfort, principle over loyalty. They become the anchors in the storm, the ones who remind the world that the pursuit of truth, however difficult, is the only pursuit that gives justice meaning. Their courage, though often lonely, becomes the moral compass by which future generations navigate their own times of turmoil. Truth, by its nature, is patient but not passive. It moves through people, through documents, through conscience. It appears in places where lies cannot reach, in the testimony of those who refuse to be silent, in the evidence that survives destruction, in the memory of those who remember what others wished to forget. It outlives denial because it is woven into the order of things. The tide may withdraw, but it never disappears. It simply prepares its next return. And when it does, it comes not as vengeance, but as correction, not to destroy, but to reveal what was hidden beneath the surface all along. The relentlessness of truth is both a comfort and a warning. It comforts those who have been silenced, for it assures them that injustice cannot last forever. It warns those who have built power on deception, for it promises that the reckoning, though delayed, will arrive without mercy. Truth has no allegiance except to itself. It does not bend to opinion or convenience. Its only loyalty is to clarity, to justice, to the unchangeable reality that actions carry consequences even when words try to disguise them. When the tide of truth rises, it exposes everything, not just the wrongdoer, but the system that enabled the wrongdoing. It washes away excuses, revealing the structures of complicity that stood silently in the background. It demands not only personal accountability, but collective reflection. It asks difficult questions: who knew and said nothing? Who saw and chose to look away? The tide spares no one who built comfort upon avoidance. It forces a reckoning not only of conduct, but of conscience. For those who built their world on illusion, the arrival of truth feels like destruction. But it is not destruction, it is revelation. It strips away the performance, the language, the justification, until only the facts remain. And in those bare facts lies the purest form of justice, not the justice of courts or politics, but the justice of reality reasserting itself. Every denial, every evasion, every attempt to distort the truth eventually collapses under the sheer, unrelenting weight of what is real. The tide will not stop until balance is restored, until what was hidden is seen, until the false is swept aside by what has always been true. What these moments reveal is not simply the fall of one person, but the reaffirmation of timeless principles that hold every society together. Power, no matter how loud or unrestrained, eventually meets the quiet force of accountability. Influence can bend perception, but it cannot rewrite the law. Public opinion may be persuaded for a time, but when confronted with evidence, it always finds its way back to reason. Defiance may delay judgment, yet every act of resistance against truth only deepens the inevitability of consequence. History, patient and unsentimental, keeps record of every choice made in the shadows of ambition. It does not forget who sought justice and who hid from it. And truth, relentless, impartial, and eternal, moves forward, washing away the illusions built to contain it. These are not abstract ideals. They are the rhythm of justice itself, the moral pulse that ensures no one remains untouchable forever. When the systems of integrity appear fragile, it is worth remembering that their strength lies not in speed, but in endurance. Justice does not rush, because it knows that time, truth, and consequence are its most loyal allies. The tide always returns, the record always reveals, and the truth, though resisted, always reclaims its ground. This is the lesson written not only in courtrooms and headlines, but in the deeper story of human conduct. Every era has its tests, every generation its reckoning. And through each one, we are reminded that while influence may fade and power may crumble, the pursuit of truth remains undefeated, steady, patient, and absolute in its return.